They are the elite special forces of ancient Germany. They're known as the Ghost Warriors, a fanatical corps of experts trained in night fighting.
These are men who could move silently through the forest. They'd been hunting since they were children. Now, though, they're not hunting deer and bear and boar, they're hunting Romans.
They appear out of nowhere, sowing fear and panic among their enemies. In the 1st century AD, ancient Rome sent a huge army against them. The outcome still echoes through history.
The Roman soldiers were caught in the perfect trap. The Emperor Augustus was devastated. This was a personal defeat as well as a major political defeat.
This is the true story of the Germanic Ghost Warriors. Germany, the 1st century AD. A wild and inhospitable place. It's a region nestling on the northern frontiers of the Roman Empire, known as Germania.
For the Romans, Germania was the final frontier. It was the edge of the world.
Was still deep, dark, ancient forest. This is the epitome of a barbaric landscape. As Roman soldiers move into this landscape, their minds fill with nightmare images.
This was as far away from the civilization of Italy as it was possible to imagine. It was a dark place, it was full of strange people, it was dangerous.
The local Germanic tribes are fierce and independent.
They had a proud tradition of independence. German communities were very free, very loosely structured. The individual German tribesman considered himself to be a free man.
They are warlike and dangerous. Warriors are trained in a variety of weapons.
Germanic tribesmen were famous for fighting with spears. The word Germany comes from an old Germanic word for spear. In many ways, Germania was the land of the spearsman.
A spear is a really effective weapon, which is why it's been used from all the way back into the Paleolithic with stone-tipped spears, right away through to using a bayonet on the end of a rifle. All a spear does is increase the reach of the warrior. This means that they can strike to the face, to the feet, to the shoulders. Anywhere that's exposed by a Roman soldier, they will hit it.
They're also taught to use the slingshot, another formidable weapon. John Naylor is an expert in its use.
Simple science. All you're doing is doubling the length of your arm, so it makes you twice as powerful as if you throw it by hand. When you add into that rotary motion, it's even more powerful. With practice, it can be frighteningly accurate. A skilled slinger at 100 metres to 200 metres would expect to be able to hit the target the size of a head. 10 to 20 shots in a minute isn't impossible. And if you've got 100 slingers, that could be 2,000 stones flying through the air towards the enemy.
The Germanic warriors would often combine this withering fire with another, even more deadly missile. The javelin.
The javelin has a range of anywhere between 10 and 50 metres. It's not a huge long-range weapon, however, it's perfect for the forest.
Finally, there's the most basic weapon of all. The club.
The club is a very, very effective weapon. Even through the mail armour that the Romans are wearing, it's going to have an impact. You can break bones, break limbs, concuss through a helmet. Dirty, strike fighting. There's hardly any weapon to beat it.
Spears, slingshots, javelins, and clubs. A powerful arsenal every young Germanic male has been using since childhood.
They have muscle memory around these weapons. These weapons become an extension of their own body.
But they're at their most deadly in the hands of one particular group of fighters. The Ghost Warriors. They're an elite group of special forces, trained to fight at night.
The Ghost Warriors were a highly mobile, highly motivated, aggressive force. But above all, they were familiar with the terrain.
These were a black ops unit of Germanic warriors trained specifically to fight at night.
It's said they're one of the first fighting forces to employ full-body camouflage. Something very familiar to today's special forces.
Some things have remained constant throughout the ages, and camouflage and concealment is an essential element of warcraft and survival in the battlefield.
They paint their faces, shields, armor, and weaponry black.
All they need to do is take ash from the fires and the soot that collects on the bottom of their cooking pots and rub it over themselves. Instant camouflage. They could create the same sort of mottled patterns as we see in modern camouflage fabrics. They break up their shape, and in breaking up their shape, they're harder for the human eye to recognize at night.
They know how to turn dark to their advantage.
They were familiar with working in low light levels. They knew the tricks, the simple tricks like bending your knees when you look at an enemy so that the enemy is silhouetted against the light. The night sky is always lighter than the ground.
They're masters of stealth. Like special forces today, they train in how to silently sneak up and kill. To the Romans, these night fighters are a source of legend, fear, even terror.
They would appear out of the trees as if by magic, and suddenly attack. And then they would hide back into the trees. They'd hit you hard and then escape before you knew what had happened. This must have been absolutely terrifying, that they would vanish before dawn.
Nothing has changed. The night is still the friend of the special operative.
It's very typical of special forces operations to lay up, and all actions will be carried out at night.
It's a clear weapon you can use, a psychological weapon. It's camouflage, it's concealment, it's capitalizing on your advantages of local knowledge. The Ghost Warriors are the equivalent of our Black Ops people today.
They're an unruly band of fearsome fighters outside the control of Rome. It's a situation Rome, accustomed to total control, finds hard to accept. In 7 AD, the Roman Emperor Augustus decides it's time to tame the Germanic hordes and bring them into the empire. He thinks he knows just the man for the job. Publius Quintilius Varus is a leading member of the Roman aristocracy.
Publius Quintilius Varus was one of the best generals of his age. He had been personal secretary to the emperor. He knew exactly how the imperial system worked. He was even married into the imperial royal family. He was the right man at the right time for the right job.
To Varus, taming Germania sounds an easy mission. He will deploy Rome's tried and tested practice for colonizing foreign lands. As the empire has expanded, the Romans have co-opted local people and put them into Roman uniforms.
It would take senior members of tribes, it would bring them into the Roman fold, and it would show them the benefits of Roman civilization.
The idea was that these would become, in a sense, ambassadors among their own people for Roman rule.
These co-opted warriors, known as auxiliaries, would then be taught to fight, Roman style.
These were effectively mercenaries which had been brought into the Roman army.
In Germania, Varus is confident he knows just the auxiliary who can help him tame the unruly Germanic hordes. He's the commander of the powerful Cherusci tribe, who live in the northwest of the country, near present-day Hanover. His name is Arminius.
He's a member of what we might call the royal family of a very powerful tribe, very powerful group.
If we believe the Roman authors who write that he was more intelligent than any other barbarian they had ever seen, then I think we have to assume that he must have been very charismatic, convincing, probably even good-looking, because these authors even describe his sparkling dark eyes.
He's 28 years old and has spent most of his adult life in the Roman army. He now commands a unit of auxiliaries. For his efforts, he's been rewarded with Roman citizenship. Rome has given him a solid grounding in the art of war.
This was a very clever man who understood strategy and, above all, understood how the Romans worked.
He knew how the Romans organized an army with 10,000, 20,000 men.
He's regarded as a friend and ally of Rome. But Arminius is not the loyal subject he appears. He's traveled widely through the Roman Empire and seen close up the violent impact of Roman rule.
The experience of a Roman occupying force was very unpleasant. They would come in, they would rape the women, they would take slaves, they would steal money. This was an iron fist in an iron glove. It was deeply unpleasant.
Arminius hates the idea that this might happen to his people. Thoughts of resistance start churning in his brain.
Suddenly, inside Arminius's head, the light is going on.
He's already witnessed Roman bullying in Germania.
He thought, I will do anything to stop that happening to my people.
From the beginning, when the Romans first met the Germanic tribes, there was a resentment that anybody could come in and tell them what to do. They were used to running their own affairs.
Arminius keeps these thoughts to himself. But secretly he lays plans that will lead Varus into an historic and deadly battle with the Ghost Warriors. Today, Minden is a pretty town on the banks of the River Weser. 2,000 years ago, it's Varus's summer camp, an isolated Roman garrison in the tribal lands of Arminius and the Cherusci. In late summer AD 9, he prepares his legions for their annual march south to their winter quarters. Suddenly, Arminius arrives with important news. There are reports of a tribal uprising several days' march to the west. He suggests the Roman legions, instead of marching immediately south, should first loop west to suppress it. Varus, suspecting nothing, readily agrees.
For Varus, Arminius must have been a friend. If you imagine that he is living in this rather hostile environment, and then there comes somebody who belongs to these barbaric people, but nonetheless he is one of us.
To Varus, the idea that Arminius might be plotting against him is inconceivable.
He didn't understand that people didn't want Rome. It was completely unintelligible to him.
It's a serious misjudgment. Trusting Arminius will be Varus's first big mistake. For weeks, Arminius has been laying his plans.
Arminius was clearly shrewd. He was also clearly charismatic.
He's been trying to rally the local chieftains and warn them of Rome's plans to colonize their lands. It's not an easy task.
The Germans in those days were not the Germans of today. They were not regarded as the efficient team players that they are today. These were disorganized, lazy, inefficient, primitive, annoying, pugnacious tribesmen who couldn't do anything without it all falling apart.
Arminius's genius lies in pulling this rabble together.
He must have convinced them that I am the guy that is going to lead you to victory against this equivalent of the US Army. To turn these fractious tribes, even for one task, into a lethally effective army in a very short period of time. I mean, it's Napoleonic in its achievement.
But to finally win over the tribesmen, Arminius must answer one last question. How can they combat the might of the Roman Empire? One thing is immediately clear. The Germanic warriors can never defeat the Romans in open battle.
The Roman army in conventional warfare was the most powerful military machine in the ancient world. High-tech, immensely disciplined, highly drilled. In pitched battle, in the 1st century AD, the Romans virtually always won.
The key to victory lies in luring the Romans into a situation where all this power is useless.
The only way you could beat them was by drawing them into difficult terrain and then waging a hit-and-run guerrilla struggle against them.
You have to take them on your terms, and strictly on your terms. That means you have to use every advantage available to you, of knowledge of the ground, knowledge of the routes, of your own people and their capabilities. It requires coordination, intelligence, and a very deep knowledge of the terrain you're fighting on.
Arminius now reveals to the doubting tribesmen he's identified the perfect spot to maximize their advantages. The Roman legions will have to pass through the vast Teutoburg forest. Here, at one point, between a wooded hill on one side and a swamp on the other, the track narrows down into a natural pinch point.
This meant that the Roman army could not march in its normal formation. Rather than marching 10 abreast, the Roman soldiers at most could march 6 abreast. They will have felt slightly ill at ease. They were out of their normal way of doing things.
It's the perfect place for an ambush. Here, the Romans will be trapped. Arminius will be free to attack them by day and night. This is when the ghost warriors will come into their own. It's an inspired plan, but can it really work against 20,000 Roman soldiers? The Roman force sets out from Minden. Germanic spies track their progress. The legions are accompanied by Arminius and his auxiliaries. Up ahead of them, deep in the woods, the Germanic warriors prepare their trap. Arminius has briefed them on exactly what to do. they build a defensive rampart beside the track. It stretches for 400 meters. It's carefully disguised to blend into the landscape. Mastering the terrain is a basic part of Black Ops warcraft and training.
It's absolutely essential to identify good locations for the main kill group and the cut-off teams. Each person might not necessarily need a tree to hide behind, but you know, they might need a bank or a natural lip on the ground. It's a complex, multi-stage operation, and not any fool can do it.
With the rampart complete, the warriors spread out through the densely wooded hillside and wait. As Varus's forces approach the ambush, Arminius makes his move.
One of the things that the Roman auxiliary soldiers did was they were used as reconnaissance forces.
Arminius suggests to Varus he takes his auxiliaries ahead of the main force to scope out the route. It's a perfectly normal practice. Varus, suspecting nothing, agrees. It's his second major mistake. Arminius and his troops make their way to a prearranged meeting point. Here they meet up with fellow tribesmen. All their allegiances to Rome now fall away. The combined force moves off towards the ambush. Among the Roman troops, unaccustomed to the forest, there's growing concern.
The whole formation had to break up. They had to form a line, and it was like a 20-kilometer-long train that was moving through the countryside.
The column of soldiers and retainers stretches back for miles.
Communication became even more of a problem than it had right at the beginning. There was no way of the back knowing what the front was doing. Roman legionaries never liked marching through forest. They were places of fear. Bad things happened.
It's very unnerving. You don't have local knowledge of the area. Normally, knowledge dispels fear, and that's something you totally don't have. Every level of every footstep, there's a massive sense of uncertainty.
It's a sensation former SAS member Ken Jones has experienced personally.
In Afghanistan, you know that these guys have grown up with a weapon in their hand since they've been 11 years old. In this extreme hostile environment, it's their backyard. You know they've already got that advantage on you, no matter what your level of training or skill set.
This was an incredibly delicate, dangerous situation for the Roman army.
But Varus, still suspecting nothing, pushes on.
He was suffering from what we now call the sunk costs fallacy, which is that you've put so much effort and invested so much trust, in this case in Arminius, that you simply can't believe that he's not worth it and that he's going to turn against you and destroy all your dreams.
It's Varus's third mistake. At the ambush, the Germanic javelin throwers ready their positions. Slingshots are prepared, ammunition gathered. All await Arminius's order. Below them, they can hear the approaching Roman column.
They would have heard the sound of trumpets. They would have heard the sound of armor jingling. This was loud. There was no doubt this was the Roman army approaching.
That's when the adrenaline surge kicks back in again. Your body's fully charged with adrenaline and a kind of sixth sense of excitement. Almost makes you want to vomit. You can feel your stomach turn. You start swallowing, your mouth becomes extremely dry, and you might perspire and sweat a little as well. It's a massive emotion you're facing.
But Arminius holds his fire. The plan is to attack the Roman column at several points, splitting it into sections, breaking communications between the head and tail, and forcing each section to fight in isolation. The minutes tick by.
Time seems to stand still, and your consciousness system seems to shrink. It's just focused on that one moment.
Suddenly, Arminius gives the order. A rain of javelins and slingshot shower down from the trees. The Germanic tribesmen are in their element. The Romans attempt to form a defensive shield, but they've been caught badly off guard.
The Roman soldiers won't have known what to do, and rumor will have spread up and down the soldiers' line very, very rapidly.
Soon afterwards, the volley is followed by close combat. The warriors sweep down through the trees and out of the forest.
There's no room for hesitation, doubt. Everything happens so quickly in such a blur. You're so intensely focused on that one action, time disappears.
It's a feeling soldiers never forget.
A 15-minute firefight can just seem like a couple of minutes. It's so intense, physically and mentally.
Varus is caught completely unprepared.
Before even the idea that there might be something wrong in this scenario, he probably found himself already in this bottleneck.
The Roman soldiers were caught in the perfect trap. In front of them were the Germanic warriors, and it was sheer weight of numbers from behind meant that there was no way the Roman soldiers could turn round and go back.
As the Romans fall, they're stripped of anything of value.
For the Roman army, this was terrifying. They understood an army that sat before them and then they could have a formal battle. These warriors didn't play by the rules.
The battle drags on until nightfall. Finally, Arminius gives the order to withdraw. Night descends on a bewildered Roman army.
Anybody who's been in the forest now at night, on military exercises or not, will know it's a very, very mysterious place. It's gods and terrors and ghosts and spirits and fairies and malicious things that scream at you in the night and surprise you when you should be asleep. It's a very different place at night than in the day, the forest.
Normal Roman tactics would have been to dig in and set up camp. But Varus, worried he'll never escape the forest alive, opts to make a break for it. This is his fourth mistake. Now it's the turn of the ghost warriors. They blacken their faces.
The process of camming up is very much a psychological as well as a physical action of putting it on. Hands, neck, face, ears, the back of ears. It's adding an extra layer of defense. You do withdraw into yourself, and you know when you put the cam on, you know then it's becoming real.
They stare into the night, preparing their eyes for the dark.
You normally allow yourself 15 to 20 minutes for your sight to get accustomed to the level of darkness. All your senses are heightened. It's so much more intense at night.
Finally, they camouflage their weapons to stop them glinting in the moonlight. Then, as the Roman forces appear below, the night fighters move in for the kill. Silently, like ghosts, they creep through the trees. They know every sound and shadow.
You get a kind of a sixth sense for what's lurking around the next corner.
These are men who could move silently through the forest. They'd been hunting since they were children. Now, though, they're not hunting deer and bear and boar. They're hunting Romans.
The first thing a Roman legionary would see was the white of a German's eyes and his sword coming down on you.
They appear out of the dark as if by magic. The Romans have never faced anything like it. Are they fighting men or spirits?
The ghost warriors must have seemed like demons.
The Roman army would have been completely psychologically under the gun. This was not the kind of warfare that the Romans were trained to fight. They didn't know what was going on.
From the Roman perspective, it was probably entirely chaotic and extremely frightening. They were surrounded by enemy mystery, by the terrible forests.
The ghost warriors cut swathes through the Roman legions and then vanish before daybreak. The next day, the Germans attack again.
You do what damage you can with overwhelming local superiority. And that requires mobility and flexibility, command and control, that even today is remarkable.
It's followed by another terrifying night.
What the German tribesmen are doing is to play to their sense of being at home in nature, being at home in the forest.
Arminius' strategy was non-stop warfare. It was to grind down the Roman legionaries. It was to make sure they didn't have a chance for a break.
By the third morning, the Romans are scattered through the forest. The exhausted legions are broken up and isolated. As Varus contemplates the carnage, defeat stares him in the face.
The question now for Varus in his own mind was, what could he do? There was no chance for a legionary commander to go back and say, I'm terribly sorry, I've lost all the legions. He was now at the edge of his life.
He now reaches a terrible decision.
Varus knew exactly what kind of a reception he could have received from the Germanic tribesmen. He will have been cut up, he will have been nailed to a tree. They did terrible, terrible things to Roman soldiers that they found.
That morning, in shame and fear, Varus falls on his sword. The Roman forces collapse. The Germanic fighters move in for the final kill. Three Roman legions have been completely wiped out. It's an historic victory for Arminius' Germanic warriors. surviving Romans are passed to priestesses for ritual bloodletting. Ears and hands are nailed to trees.
After a battle, there was an awful lot of ritual sacrifice. Priestesses would have huge cauldrons and cut the Roman soldiers until their blood ran into these cauldrons.
The bloodletting is said to purify the land of Roman influence. The Battle of Teutoburg Forest is the greatest Roman defeat for over 200 years. 900 miles to the south, in Rome, there's blissful ignorance. Then a messenger arrives with a box for the Emperor Augustus. It contains the bloody head of Varus.
The Emperor Augustus was devastated. This was a personal defeat as well as a major political defeat.
We're told that he goes around the palace tearing out his hair and wailing, "Varus, Varus, give me back my legions."
In just 3 days, the Roman Empire has lost 10% of its fighting force.
It's difficult to exaggerate the scale of the defeat which the Romans suffer. A huge, great gap is blown in the Roman Empire's frontier defences.
Such was the shame, such was the scale of the defeat, that the legions 17th, 18th, and 19th were struck from the Roman military. They were never used again. No soldier would ever have wanted to serve in those units.
Today in Germany, victory at the Battle of Teutoburg Forest is remembered by a monument to Arminius. Elsewhere, excavations at the battle site have unearthed a grisly tangle of smashed up bones and weapons. And Arminius's defensive rampart has been reconstructed. The Germanic ghost warriors have become a legend for a new generation of Germans. They're said to be the drug-fueled warriors who can turn into wild animals. They're bloodthirsty pagan fanatics who ruthlessly lead the way into battle.
They're mad, bad, and dangerous to know.
They could not be trusted to do anything but kill everything in their path.
Striking terror into the heart of peace-loving Christians across medieval Europe. These are the Viking berserkers.
They had almost superhuman strength.
But it's one lone berserker's last stand on an English bridge in 1066 which has claimed their place in history as one of the most fearsome of all ancient special forces. Just off England's northeastern coast, in Northumberland, lies the holy island of Lindisfarne. It's the holiest place in Dark Ages England. And the scene of one of the bloodiest encounters in the country's history. Home to the Lindisfarne monks, the monastery there is filled with ornate, beautiful, and valuable religious treasures.
People in Anglo-Saxon England, early medieval Europe, they believed in the protection of the saints. So Lindisfarne ought to have been invulnerable.
But what the monks don't know is out to sea, a fleet of strange wooden ships is bearing down on them.
Viking longships roll up on the beach at Lindisfarne. These warriors jump out, and the monks would have been utterly shocked, horrified.
The invaders overrun the monastery. They ruthlessly cut down any man in their path, smashing, grabbing, and looting.
Anything they could pick up and take home. Gold, silver, jewels.
The monks desperately try to hide the monastery's precious artifacts, but they're helpless.
It seems like a lot of the monks had taken refuge by the altar. Some of them were definitely killed there because we're told about the altar being spattered with blood.
The raid on Lindisfarne is brutal and merciless. For the holy men, the arrival of these axe-wielding maniacs feels like a punishment from God.
They would be utterly stunned and astounded that somebody would have the temerity to actually attack God's house.
Those lucky enough to survive the bloodbath are dragged away and taken prisoner. Among them are some of England's most respected religious leaders. They'll be held for ransom. The rest are destined for slavery.
What certainly happened was an unknown number of the monks were taken back to the longships and taken back to Norway, which is where this particular bunch came from.
Slaves were big business. British slaves who were sold as far afield as Byzantium and Baghdad. They would have taken all the slaves that they could.
The raid on Lindisfarne marks the beginning of the Viking Age.
They said I smell! I had a bath only yesterday!
Today, the Vikings' vicious assaults are a distant memory. Instead, the Vikings have become figures of fascination, and they're not always taken seriously.
You strike me down, that little girl will cry.
With crazy names like Ragnar Hairybreeks, Sven Forkbeard, Thorfinn Skullsplitter, and Eric Bloodaxe. They're perfect fodder for enthusiastic historical reenactors. But the reality is, they were intrepid explorers and fearless fighters. Their story begins in the frozen wastes of Scandinavia. Countries we now know as Norway, Denmark, and Sweden. At home, the Vikings face some of the most brutal living conditions on Earth. With cold and unforgiving winters and land that's often covered in snow and ice, it can be difficult to grow food. The Vikings quickly realize that if they want a good life, they'll have to steal it. The only way they can do that is to take to the oceans. From the late 700s, Vikings begin attacking places like France, England, Ireland, and Scotland from the sea.
You could certainly see them as entrepreneurs who are taking what might be perceived as a business opportunity to create wealth for themselves. Pure capitalist thinking.
Central to their success is their raiding vessel, the Viking longship. Morten Ravn is a curator at the Viking Ship Museum in Roskilde in Denmark.
But you should imagine people sitting on each of these positions here, which is marked by the floor timbers, and you would imagine them sitting there and having an oar outside the oar holes, which you can also see here, and row the ship. And it would be 26 men on board a ship like this, rowing, 13 on each side.
Clinker-style wooden warships with their characteristic hull shape can carry crews of up to 100 men. Out on the North Sea, the Vikings face freezing cold conditions and vicious waters. As navigation is critical, they use the sun, the stars, the wind direction, and even the color and taste of the sea to help them find their way. But what makes the longships particularly special is their speed. With the use of the sail and oars, they can reach speeds of up to 15 knots. They're light, fast, and with their shallow hulls, they're perfect raiding ships.
They didn't dig that deep into the water. The draft was not that big, which means that you could land the ships, but it needed obviously to be a sandy beach or something like that.
They're vessels that have the same qualities as those used by special forces today.
Viking ships are pretty low profile. They'd be able to beach their craft and deploy it back into the sea to make a getaway with speed and haste.
Cruising Europe's shores in their longships, the Vikings are opportunists. But they don't just attack at random. What the Vikings are looking for is defenseless targets filled with valuable treasures. Remote monasteries and small isolated villages are rich pickings.
They're targeting the most vulnerable people with the most money, which generally means the church.
Like the very best special forces, time is spent in reconnaissance.
It's quite possible that they would sail up to the coast and spot a likely joint and jump over the edge of their ship and attack it.
For people living near the sea, raids that come out of the blue are difficult to guard against.
It's impossible to defend an entire coastline. It's impossible to man such vast stretches of water. You think of the vastness of most coastlines, it's extremely difficult.
Always on the lookout for easy-to-plunder targets, the Vikings developed their own special type of lightning assault.
It's a kind of raid they call strand hog. Come to a village, people are alert, you move on. Find a bit further on, you find there's a village and it looks like everyone's asleep. You run in, grab what you can, get out fast.
Speed, aggression and surprise, it's essential to their success.
But even when their target is identified, the raiders don't just attack recklessly.
The Vikings actually knew, of course, what they were doing when they went out on these raids. They must have had some sort of intelligence, knowing where to strike and with what force. You would probably either have scouts ahead, knowing where to land, or you would maybe land your troops in not so hostile areas.
The Vikings are careful to guard their backs and ensure that they can get in and away quickly.
With a raid on a monastery, there's probably a certain amount of forethought has gone into that one. You'd hit the beach, you'd need to leave a few people to guard the ships. You know, ships can be burnt, and you don't want somebody to sneak around and set fire to them. And you probably detail people to go out and cover possible escape routes.
If the mission is going according to plan, victims will have no idea of what's going to happen.
They always have the tactical advantage. It's very, very hard to get one step ahead of the Vikings because you don't know where they're going to go. In some ways, modern piracy has some kind of parallels. But I think in the tactical sense, it's got much more akin, really, with terrorism.
To make them all the more frightening, they have a simple but brutal array of weapons. The Vikings are famously associated with the axe. The axe head of a typical Dane axe is made of iron and steel. Carefully crafted to be lightweight, fast and well balanced, its blade can be forged to be as thin as just 2 millimeters, giving it a devastating cutting capability. Martin Holtman is a Danish ancient weapons expert.
This is a Dane's axe. It's a typical Viking weapon. You would use this with 2 hands. It's not really hard to lift at all. It's surprisingly light. And you can actually swing it back like this and then move your hands. This way you gain a lot of momentum.
On the battlefield, the Dane axe is used both tactically.
I could take out this axe and hook his leg, and I could just draw him out.
And it's also used to kill.
If you meet someone with this kind of weapon, you better run.
But possibly the most terrifying and deadly weapon of all is the double-edged sword. The most precious of all Viking weapons, it's often passed down from father to son. A Viking warrior would learn technique from an early age.
A Viking sword is made out of steel. The typical weight is around 1 kilogram.
On the battlefield, the Viking sword can dole out death in a number of vicious ways.
It's definitely a slashing weapon for cutting. It can also be used for stabbing.
And if it doesn't kill the victim, it's guaranteed to maim him.
This sword could definitely take off a leg and a hand with ease.
This is as brutal and as aggressive as warfare can get. You're so up close and personal, and they're using such heavy, cumbersome weapons, which has been utterly brutal.
The remains of Viking victims across northern England show the damage inflicted by the Viking axe and the Viking sword. Their weapons, together with the Vikings' sheer fighting prowess, make them a terrifying prospect for all who encounter them. From the 8th century through to the 11th century, bands of Vikings launch larger and larger attacks on more and more communities. And they don't just use brute force to seize land, gold, and slaves. The Vikings have even more sinister methods.
I'm quite sure that people were murdered and tortured in order to get them to tell where they'd hidden their valuables. There probably was a lot of killing just for the sake of it, simply to create the kind of terror to cow people, to make them obedient. It must have been a terrifying and violent experience for the victims of Viking raids.
But if the Vikings are the special forces of their day, within their warrior bands, they have an even more elite team, a SEAL Team 6. They're known as the Berserkers.
They were ruthless warriors who would stop at nothing to slaughter their opponents. They were absolutely without fear of injury or death.
They were supposed to have chewed on their shields, howled horribly, went berserk in battle, and could not be trusted to do anything but kill everything in their path.
They're mad, bad, and dangerous to know.
I'm buying the axe.
Today, berserkers are objects of fascination, children's fantasy characters. So much so that computer games are built around them. They're depicted as giants, trolls, and ferociously fighting ogres. Painted as superhumans, they're big, powerful, the stuff of legend.
He will have quite often a horned helmet, because even though everybody knows that the Vikings didn't wear horned helmets, it's a brand almost.
But berserkers were real. One of the strongest bits of evidence as to the existence of berserkers are these chessmen, discovered around 1831. Found on the Scottish island of Lewis in the Outer Hebrides, they date from the 12th or 13th century and seem to portray berserkers.
4 of the rooks actually depict warriors biting on the shields, and they've actually physically got their teeth sticking over the rim of the shield. And what they really represent for us is a medieval Scandinavian idea of what a berserker was.
They're also mentioned in poetry or skaldic verse, and in the sagas, the Vikings' ancient historical tales, written between the 9th and 14th centuries.
When you look in saga traditions, berserkers turn up in 1s or 2s, usually they're brothers, or maybe in numbers up to a dozen. They're not common.
They were professional warriors. Big guys, the best of the best.
Part of a Viking king or lord's war band, they're considered elite members of society.
Any boat sailing to England might contain berserkers if it contains members of a king's war band.
Serving as a kind of bodyguard, they're at the forefront of an attack.
They are the core around which an army might be built. They're the ones who will lead the way into battle. When they step forward, everybody else is meant to go with them.
As the most terrifying of all Viking warriors, there is every reason to believe they were even bigger and stronger than regular Vikings. But it's their behavior which they are most renowned for, spawning the English word berserk.
Once they fly off the handle, then there can be dead people lying all over the place before they calm down.
However, it's something else that really sets them apart. The berserkers have unusual ways of preparing for battle. Ancient depictions of berserkers appear to show muscular warriors wearing these skins, complete with the heads of wild animals.
Berserk is thought to have derived from either the Old Norse word ber, meaning bare or naked, or an Old Norse word beri, meaning a bear. So it either means bear of shirt or wearing a bear skin.
The legends say that by wearing animal skins, the berserkers take on special powers. That they can shapeshift and transform themselves into wild animals.
It's a sense of getting into the spirit world, in a sense, and adopting the characteristics of the animal that you're trying to get in touch with.
It is even claimed by some that berserkers are the originators of the werewolf.
Berserkers were not werewolves. Let's start with that bit. People have seen in the berserker a werewolf, somebody who physically changes shape into an animal. What's more likely is that they took on the persona of the animal. They adopted the animal's attributes to carry them into battle, so they went in as strong as a bear or as fierce as a wolf.
You aren't literally going to become a bear or a wolf, but you want to have that strength, that ferocity.
By wearing animal skins and very little armor, the berserker not only lessens the division between himself and the animal he's trying to emulate, it also gives him mystical powers.
They were perceived as invulnerable or able to blunt swords. They couldn't be wounded anywhere that they were wearing these coats.
But the berserker has another secret weapon to help him prepare. And it may very well help him believe in his animalistic abilities. Magic mushrooms.
Their proper name is Amanita muscaria. They're very common. I mean, they're widespread all over the northern hemisphere and up into the sort of subarctic. They're your classic fairy tale mushroom, the bright red with white spots. They're commonly called the fly mushroom or the fly agaric because they're reputed to kill insects.
But the mushrooms also have another effect, which could help a warrior get into the right mental state for a fight.
They have a psychoactive drug inside, which will give you, depending on the dosage, a trip.
The idea that someone could use drugs to prepare for battle is not that far-fetched.
There were cases in World War II where German forces were given amphetamines.
The Nazis developed an early form of crystal meth to help their troops stay alert. In Vietnam, soldiers were issued with amphetamines by the US Army to heighten their senses on missions. But for berserkers, their drug of choice is so toxic, it has to be prepared in a certain way. The mushroom caps are dried, ground up, and made into a hot drink. To aid the process, they're mixed with alcohol.
Presumably in those days it would have been something like mead, something just to wash it down and quickly dissolve the chemicals into the liquid.
It's this practice of stewing the caps in liquid which acts as a catalyst, aiding the body's absorption of the drug. The alcohol will also affect the reaction.
The alcohol will, of course, help the condition. I mean, one of the things we think we don't realise is the mood affects the results immensely, and we've known this for years with other psychoactive drugs. The mood that the person is in when they take the mushroom has an enormous effect on what sort of result they get from it.
Around 30 minutes after the berserker takes his mushroom potion, it's supposed to kick in.
There's a whole host of effects that can be encountered. Common ones are muscle twitching, sweating, salivating, increased production of saliva.
The berserker starts to literally froth at the mouth. Of course, one of the problems, as with all drugs, is they have side effects.
They can get amnesia and fainting with large doses. Nausea is commonly recorded. That's one of the most common side effects. Profuse vomiting. Facial flushing. Often one's sense of balance apparently goes awry.
These side effects are so bad that some suggest that the idea that Vikings took magic mushrooms is a myth.
The one scientific study that's been done in the late 50s suggested that if they had taken magic mushrooms, they probably wouldn't have been fit to fight.
However, some experts disagree.
They've been in use 2,000–3,000 years, probably something on that order. So it's very unlikely that the Vikings would not have known of the mushroom.
And it seems berserkers may have found an ingenious way to avoid any nasty reactions. When the mushroom is passed through the body, it's stripped of some of its toxins.
We know that drinking the urine is one of the commonest ways of diluting the unpleasant side effects and increasing the potency of the chemical.
It means that only one berserker needs to experience the bad reactions brought on by the mushrooms. The other berserkers simply need to drink his urine. This appears to remove the toxic side effects, but leaves the hallucinogenic ones.
I read one report where they thought one would eat it, pass urine, someone else would eat it, someone would drink their urine, and so on, up to 5 times. It may be that one ingestion of the mushroom would actually serve quite a few people afterwards.
It's because of this that mushroom experts are convinced by the use of magic mushrooms as a means of reaching battle fury.
I'd be very surprised if they didn't use them in some of their ceremonies. My own feeling is that that may not have been the sole cause of their enormous strength and aggression, but I suspect it was a definite means of accelerating this process. Pumped full of adrenaline, anger, and I suspect that the mushroom would have been just that added extra.
So, wearing his wild animal skin and strung out on drugs, the berserker is almost ready. But there's one final thing he needs to prepare him for battle. Like all Vikings, the berserkers are religious fanatics. They're utterly devoted to one particular pagan god, Odin.
Odin is the Norse high god. He's the god of war. And berserkers had the idea that really they were chosen by Odin, that they didn't really choose to be berserkers, that it was Odin who chose them.
Eager to please Odin, an opportunity to fight for him and die for him is a privilege.
For a berserker, you honoured Odin if you killed someone in battle, and you honoured him by dying in battle. So battle was win-win. What they most wanted was death in battle was a guarantee that you would go to Valhalla.
Valhalla is the warrior's paradise in the afterlife. Like 21st century jihadists, the berserker imagines that by giving his life in the heat of battle, he'll guarantee great glory and rewards there.
Valhalla is a giant lord's hall in which they feast all night and then they go out of it during the day and they fight all day, preparing themselves for Ragnarok, the final day when all the gods will die.
Ragnarok marks the end of the universe. But for Vikings, being at Odin's side for the greatest battle of all is the ultimate honor. It's the positive welcoming of death that makes the Berserker the most fearsome of all medieval warriors. So, assisted by alcohol, with hallucinogens pumping through his body, with the characteristics of a wild animal entering his psyche, and fully prepared to die in glory, the Berserker reaches Berserkgang, the battle fury. With teeth bared, howling and growling, he faces his opposition.
The howling might well have been chanting of spells behind that shield, getting themselves really stoked up. One of the best modern analogies for it might well be the All Blacks doing a haka. It's designed to be frightening, it's designed to make you feel strong and invincible.
Berserkers have a tremendous psychological effect on their enemy.
I think it would have been very intimidating.
For ordinary peasants like the Anglo-Saxons, reluctantly pulled together to fight, it's horrifying.
They may have probably never been in the battle before in their lives. They really want to live and go back and look after the cows and see their families again. 100 yards away on the other side, there they are howling and biting their shields. They just want to run at you and hack you to pieces.
They got into this very intense and angry, worked up state where they had almost superhuman strengths. And if they were injured, they didn't feel it. They just carried on.
Off their heads with this big dosage of the mushroom, they may not really know what's going on, except that they just attack anyone that's in front of them. Like a loose cannon, you just point it in the right direction and you let them get on with it.
Viking raids across Europe increase, attacking small towns and villages, raping and pillaging. They raze peasant homes to the ground and slaughter entire communities. Eventually, the Vikings bring over their own families to settle in their conquered lands.
Around about 840, this is the point when Vikings actually do start making permanent bases. Instead of going home for the winter, you pull your ships up inside the protection of a rampart, you spend the winter there, and as soon as spring comes, you can get back to raiding nice and early. So it extends your raiding season to about 9 months of the year instead of 3 months of the year in the summer.
With the Berserkers at their heart, the Vikings managed to cultivate a vast trading empire. By the 11th century, their conquests stretch from Iceland in the north to the Mediterranean Sea in the south, and from Newfoundland in the west to Constantinople and the Caspian Sea in the east. But it's one event on an autumnal English day in 1066 that will go down in history as the Berserkers' finest hour. More than 300 Viking ships carrying as many as 14,000 men approach the northeastern coast of England. Leading them is Norwegian king, Harald Hardrada. Hardrada is an outstanding warrior. He's fought in the Balkans and across the Byzantine Empire, and has gone on to seize the Norwegian crown. Now, he's hungry for more.
He's got a very clear political ambition, and that is to make good a claim to the English throne.
His target is the greatest city in northern England, York.
The actual Viking army first lands at Scarborough and sacks the town, burns it to the ground to show the local people that resistance is futile. They move into the Humber estuary and then up the River Ouse to capture the greatest prize of all, the capital of the north, York, or in Norse, Jorvik.
York is under English control. But critically, the Vikings had conquered the city exactly 200 years before, and they regard it as their own.
For the Vikings, it's home. So now they're back to claim what they class as their city.
And for Hardrada, York is just the beginning. He believes that if he takes it, the rest of the country will fall to him. After a major victory on the outskirts of the city, York surrenders to him. Hardrada thinks the war is won, that the English crown is his. He's so confident, he's even sent a third of his army back to the Viking fleet, 12 miles upriver. But what Hardrada doesn't know is his nemesis is coming. The newly crowned Anglo-Saxon king, Harold Godwinson, has heard about the Viking king's intentions. He's hot-footed it from London with an army of some 15,000. Hardrada's Vikings, on the other hand, are bathing in their victory.
If you can imagine a late summer's hot day, the troops have walked 12 miles, probably had headaches from the night before from the revelling. I should imagine that quite a few of them would have just laid down on the grassy banks.
There's a relaxed atmosphere in the air. It's warm, sunny, probably sunbathing at the time.
We understand that initially they caught a glimpse of some dust on the horizon, which would indicate a coming of a party.
Hardrada had been expecting the arrival of some dignitaries from York for a simple hostage transfer, securing the city's surrender. What he sees is King Harold and his vast Anglo-Saxon army. Hardrada realizes he's made a terrible mistake.
He's completely dumbfounded and in shock. He didn't expect this at all. And the worst problem he faces now, he has an army outnumbered and also unarmed and under-armoured.
With his troops straddling both sides of the River Derwent, Hardrada needs to regroup. The only way to do this is to get all his men over onto the eastern side of the river via the one and only crossing point. A narrow wooden bridge, so that he can form a defensive line. The majority make it across. But then the Anglo-Saxons appear. It's now that Hardrada turns to one of his special forces. He calls on one Viking berserker. His task, to buy his king time. It's an extraordinary situation. Just one man against an entire army. First, he evokes the spirit of a wild animal. He consumes the stewed Amantia muscaria mushrooms and starts to feel the empowering effects of the hallucinogen. He believes he has the strength of a wild bear. That with his bear skin as armor, his body will repel the Anglo-Saxon weapons. That he will be invulnerable. Frothing at the mouth, in thrall to Odin, and dreaming of his place at the feasting table in Valhalla, the great warrior reaches the height of his berserk gang and steps out onto the bridge. This one berserker, armed with his Danax, confronts King Harold's 15,000 men.
You can imagine a kind of standoff. He was buying time, giving his life to buy time for the rest of the army.
One by one, brave soldiers from King Harold's army take on the great Viking warrior on the bridge. And one by one, they are cut down.
On a narrow front, probably only 1 or 2 men would have been able to attack him at a time. You can imagine that even if he was dispatching people at the rate of 1 every 30 seconds, he might have held them up for 10 minutes, quarter of an hour or more.
The English body count mounts up.
According to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, every person who tries to cross the bridge, over 40 Anglo-Saxon soldiers are killed by this one berserker.
But finally, he succumbs.
Accounts say he was finally killed by an Englishman who went down under the bridge with a spear and got him from underneath.
With his death, the Vikings are beaten. Harold Hardrada will die with an arrow to the throat. Despite the defeat, the actions of this great warrior are celebrated in the history books of the day. But there's an irony. The contest at Stamford Bridge may be regarded as the berserker's greatest stand, but it also marks the beginning of the end for the Viking Age. By the early 11th century, and certainly by 1066, berserkers are becoming a dying breed. There's a more powerful force at work than that of the pagan gods. Many Vikings have converted from paganism to a more widely held belief system.
The demise of the pagan berserker comes with the advent of Christianity. Christianity probably had some kind of neutralizing effect. Once you're all part of the same club, then you tend not to attack each other quite the same way.
years of Viking tradition are slowly eroded.
The Scandinavians begin converting to Christianity in the 10th century. You know, Denmark's the first, Sweden is the last, but even by the end of the 11th century, Sweden is mainly Christian.
Some berserkers cling on to their paganism, but gradually the purity of their military and magical might weakens. Eventually, they will disappear altogether.
In the Icelandic law codes, going berserk is outlawed in the 12th century.
Finally, berserkgang and the rituals which induce it are deemed so degenerate that they're unacceptable in moderate society. Today, the endeavors of the Norsemen still captivate and entertain us. It may be that the Vikings no longer evoke fear and horror as they did 1,200 years ago. But their elite special unit, the Berserkers, do continue to enthrall us. Thanks to a 250-year reign of terror, we can't help but admire their heroism, their iconic, fantasy-like image, and their animalistic, frenzied brilliance on the battlefield. They're the Vikings for hire. Ruthless mercenaries who strike fear into the enemy.
This is Dark Age warfare at the most brutal. Axe, sword, shield, spear.
They're the elite special forces in service to a foreign ruler, conquering unruly territories across the great Byzantine Empire. They're known as the Varangian Guard. But it's one particular man who will solidify their place in history.
Harald Hardrada is the prototypical Viking of the era.
He will develop tactics which will transform warfare across the Mediterranean.
Nobody really in their right mind wanted to storm a city wall. It was usually doomed to failure.
Hardrada's string of victories will show the Varangian Guard to be one of the most exceptional special forces of all time. Nearly 1,000 years after the birth of Christ, the Byzantine Empire is now the biggest, the richest, and the best organized state in Europe. It stretches from Italy in the west, across Greece and the Balkans, all the way to Asia Minor in the east. At its head is the Emperor, Basil II, the most powerful man in the world. But Basil's empire is under threat.
Like all empires, and I suppose like all politicians, you really have to watch your back. There's a series of very important revolts against his legitimacy.
What Basil needs is a crack troop of warriors who can suppress the internal revolts and guarantee the security of his empire. So he makes a deal. He sells his sister to the Grand Prince of Kiev in Ukraine, Vladimir the Great. Vladimir is descended from Swedish Vikings and rules what are called the Rus.
Vladimir the Great was a disgusting warrior. He was the prototypical Viking. He epitomized everything that was just nasty in the individual. He took 800 concubines, he had dozens of wives. He performed human sacrifice just at a whim to intimidate his aggressors. I mean, there was nothing redeeming about this man.
In return for his sister, Basil gets precisely what he needs. 6,000 of the most fearsome warriors on the planet. They will become known as the Varangian Guard, the finest special forces in late antiquity. Originally Vikings from Scandinavia, their ancestors had built a reputation that spread right across Europe to the ears of the emperor himself.
Most of them would have been the same kind of people who were creating mayhem around in Western Europe.
When we talk about the Vikings, we almost always think about the attacks on England and the Vikings crossing the North Sea.
For some 200 years, Vikings had been terrorizing northern and western Europe, becoming notorious for chasing wealth and their insatiable appetite for violence.
The men of Scandinavia are tough. You know, they are tattooed, they're macho, they're red-blooded.
They were ruthless warriors who would stop at nothing to slaughter their opponents.
But not all of them go raiding across northern and western Europe.
The smart Vikings didn't head west. They headed east.
What lures them is the prospect of making vast amounts of money by traveling down the vast rivers of modern-day Russia.
Those river systems, they're like arteries bringing talent from Scandinavia down towards Russia, looking for service.
They can sell themselves as soldiers of fortune, mercenaries to the mighty warlords of the region. Like the Vikings who've wreaked havoc across much of Europe, they come with a fearsome array of weapons.
Their weapon of choice was a long axe, which in reality resembled more of a meat cleaver than an actual axe. The famous Dane axe, which has a single blade up to a foot long that could sever a man's head in a single blow. This was a lethal weapon.
They also use the viciously effective double-edged sword. And the spear.
The spear is very easy to carry, doesn't weigh much. It's very cheap to make and very fast to make, so it would be an excellent weapon.
As a Viking weapons expert, Martin Holtman knows all about the advantages of using a spear in battle.
The spear was very useful. You could use it behind a shield, like holding the shield yourself, and you could try and stab after his leg or his head. You could have no shield, and if he was my friend, I could stand behind the lines and he was covering me. I was having this long spear, I could just stab the people. And move around, stab, move around, stab behind the lines. The actual one would have like a stopper down here, so when you pushed it into another person, it wouldn't go all the way through, so you could easily pull it out again. And then keep on fighting.
These Viking Rus become known as the Varangians. They earn that nickname because they famously stick together.
Verar is an Old Norse word which means probably some sort of companionship, and it's a sort of community of people with common interests. They're people who look after each other's backs. It's a very brutal, male, macho world of high achievers. These are men who have their eyes set on prestige and on riches.
But for these men, serving in the cold, harsh lands of Ukraine isn't enough. To this close-knit set of mercenaries, the prospect of serving the wealthiest man in the world, Basil II, is irresistible.
In Constantinople, they have the opportunity to gain riches beyond their wildest imagination.
So the Varangians enter the emperor's service as his elite fighting unit. And begin by crushing his internal revolts.
He had a basic problem with a rebellion against him, led by a man called Bardas Phocas, who had claimed the throne, set himself up as emperor, and his own Greek bodyguard had gone over onto his side. So he needed some troops he could rely on in order to put down this internal rebellion.
In a matter of months, Basil is able to knock out his last remaining rivals. For Basil, it's a short-term win.
Having helped Basil secure the wider empire, the Varangian Guard are given the next task, to deal with the imperial capital. Today's Istanbul, Constantinople, situated on the Bosphorus, where the continents of Europe and Asia meet, is a mighty trading post. But in the 11th century, its magnificence is without equal.
Constantinople is the most impressive and beautiful and significant city in the Mediterranean. It's a sensational, it's a jewel of a city. It's got these churches of an enormous scale and beauty. From the year 500 until 1500, it's the biggest city in Europe.
In terms of Christian European cities, it's completely unparalleled. In terms of its size, a population of 500,000 people. If you were thinking in terms of English cities in the same period, maybe London might possibly have had 10,000 people in it.
It's a melting pot of people, of languages, of noises.
But Constantinople is also a dangerous place, particularly for an emperor.
We don't talk about Byzantine politics for nothing. The Byzantine Empire is legendary for its sort of devious plotting.
While pleasantly chaotic and colorful on the outside, beneath that veneer, the city was a labyrinth of political power shifts and maneuvers that made everyone suspicious of everyone else.
Those who are finding the emperor's favor quickly attract jealousy. Those who feel that they should be getting more for what they're doing find themselves sitting in dark taverns plotting about what they can do next.
Everyone's doing deals, keeping their friends closer, their enemies twice as close.
It is, above all, to avoid the nasty fate of several of his predecessors that Basil needs the Varangian Guard.
Byzantine emperors quite often finish up getting murdered and overthrown.
So the Varangian Guard become Basil II's close protection team. They're charged with guarding all the major public buildings and are always stationed at the emperor's imperial palaces. And they accompany him when he attends church and other formal occasions.
They stand around the emperor. They can form a ring around him and sort of move him through the palace, like a cordon of special services that would go around our leaders today, around the President of America.
But the Varangian Guard have another more sinister task. They are the Emperor's assassins.
They're the people that the Emperor will send to deal with suspected traitors. They also get to do the nasty stuff.
They become Basil's secret police, in charge of arresting suspected criminals and political enemies. Those posted at Constantinople's grim Numera prison quickly win a reputation for astonishing savagery.
There's many cases of intimidation and torture. A common thing was cut off the nose or cut off the ear. There's even cases of them taking human excrement and putting it in the criminals' eyes and nose and mouth.
Blindings are a particular Varangian favorite.
It's not thought that they actually physically put eyes out by poking things into them or hooking eyes out. It's thought that they actually used acid. And they used it to scar the cornea, so that people were, in a sense, functionally blinded by it, but not 100% blinded. They could probably still tell the difference between night and day. Castration was quite a popular Byzantine punishment, so no doubt if that had to be done, they would probably be the guys who would get the old shears out.
When they're not doing the Emperor's dirty work, around Constantinople, the Varangian Guard enjoy the good life. There's plenty of things to keep young, virile Vikings occupied around town.
Constantinople itself had plenty of entertainment. The chariot racing was the most popular of all the activities. I suppose a bit like professional footballers. Women, booze.
For men raised in the cold, harsh lands of Scandinavia and Russia, it's like paradise.
I don't think we can really imagine the culture shock that these Norsemen, these Vikings from snow-covered lands would have experienced when they first set foot in Constantinople. Keep in mind, these people lived in huts. Now they come to a lush tropical climate, and much to their delight, an endless supply of fine wines.
To the Byzantine aristocratic elite, the loutish behavior of the Imperial Guard is shocking. The Varangians' hard drinking and debauchery earns them the nickname the Emperor's wineskins.
The Guard were looked at suspiciously by the local common people in Constantinople, and you can't blame them. They were drunk 24/7. I mean, they were rowdy. There's a famous historian and poet who was put in prison, and he writes a poem about the fact that he can't sleep at night, every night, because these guys are screaming and yelling and causing incredible ruckus.
That behavior could explain why even today a bizarre piece of Viking graffiti can still be seen etched on a balustrade inside the Hagia Sophia, the greatest cathedral of its age.
I suppose we do know that sort of like football hooligans on tour, you know, if you had enough to drink and you're somewhere that you want to leave your mark, chiseling something into the side of a wall, you know, it's a way of showing you're there and showing off to your mates that you've done it.
The inscription reads, Halfdan was here.
He could have inscribed his mark anywhere, So why choose to do it in the great cathedral? And I suppose it's showing, if I'm going to prove I've been anywhere, it's there.
Basil II's Varangian Guard may be causing mayhem around Constantinople, but he has another task for them. Now he's stabilized the empire, he wants to expand it. The Varangian Guard are incorporated into the main Byzantine army. They're divided into companies of 500. Each company is placed under the command of a regular officer, called the Akulathos. It means the Varangians, unlike the typical Vikings, have to learn discipline.
The Varangians have to be very organised, very aggressive, but still be able to follow orders.
But there's another key difference in how they're used. Where most Vikings are used to charging headlong into battle, the Emperor uses his Varangians in a different way. He holds them in reserve.
They would have hoped that by taking a position further back, that they would then be able to exercise some sort of control and command during the course of the battle and come up with tactics which would actually respond to the enemy movements.
Only when the fight gets to its fiercest does the Emperor commit his shock troops. They start by banging their shields. Then they charge.
What we do pick up about the Varangians consistently is they're incredibly brave in battle. So they never give ground, that they always fight for each other, and their intensity is huge, that they just carry on fighting. They'll let their swords drip with blood, and they will keep fighting until the very, very end.
The Varangians aren't just fierce, they are tactical. Key to their success is the use of the shield wall.
This was essentially shields interlocked. It could be used as a defensive against cavalry, archers, infantry.
You have to imagine that several people were standing like this and they were interlocking the shields like this. This way it was a very, very strong formation and you could actually move forward like this.
But the Varangian Guard's shield wall is about more than protection. They deploy a unique Viking tactic to pierce enemy defenses. The boar snout.
If you were to break a shield wall, you would create a formation like a wedge, something like that, and you would have the strongest people in front.
By placing one of their biggest and fiercest warriors at the wall's center, and then charging at an opponent's shield wall, sheer weight and momentum not only pierces the enemy lines, it also spreads panic through their ranks.
They were probably bigger, they had very heavy weapons, so if you ran in with big axes, cutting through the enemy lines, then you could create an opening.
Under the banner of Emperor Basil II, success follows success for the Varangian Guard.
It has often been suggested that Basil II's reign is really the Golden Age, and that is in no small part due to the Guard.
He keeps his army busy, pushing the frontiers as sort of like ripples, constantly outwards.
They fight gallantly and gloriously for their emperor and are at the forefront of a string of victories in Syria, Georgia, Armenia, Bulgaria, Greece, Macedonia, and southern Italy, not only quashing unruly factions of the empire, but increasing its influence far and wide.
Varangians are described in the Norse literature as being incredibly important. They're the ones who hold the empire together. They are achieving all the battles, left, right, and centre.
Victory makes the Varangian Guard very rich men.
You would be paid between £17,000 and about £32,000 a year. If our Varangian had wanted to have a nice, pretty young virgin slave girl all for himself, he could have gone down the slave market and bought one for about £360. So even the basic lowest estimate of their pay has got absolutely enormous purchasing power in Constantinople.
On top of their monthly wage, the Varangian Guard receive regular bonuses and a third of all battle spoils. And there are even more perks.
Your food's all in, you've got all your weapons provided and the very best quality weapons because the Emperor wants you to look magnificent.
And what do they do with these spoils of war? They spend.
The market of Constantinople sells everything. It's beyond imagination. There are spices, there are metals, gold, silver, and so on. There's no limit of how much money you can spend buying things for yourself.
It makes the Varangian Guard the envy of their family and friends back in Scandinavia and Ukraine.
So after the Guard had completed their service, I mean, they would go back home. And when these Guards went to the Northlands with just incredible riches that you could never imagine anyone but an emperor having, well, you can imagine the frenzied excitement that would create in the homeland.
Soon, every bright young Viking wants to be a member of the Varangian Guard.
It's Varangians who've been to Constantinople who come back and talk about it, and that encourages others to go.
Of course, other men would have seen all of that and thought, yes, please, I'd really like a slice of the action.
In the early years of the 11th century, more and more Viking mercenaries are ready to join the club.
The success they had proved to be the greatest recruitment vehicle they could ever ask for.
The young men of Scandinavia that heading for Constantinople was almost like a sort of quite a glamorous gap year where you'd go and earn your spurs. You'd go and see the world, you'd be exposed to sights and sounds that you'd never seen before. You'd be able to be a military tough type and show off your tattoos and your prowess. The basic idea is if you're loyal, if you're good, you can earn your keep and you can rise up through the system.
Amongst those who make their way from Russia is a Viking warrior who will take the Varangian Guard to a whole new level. Towering over 6 feet tall, the muscular young man with his long, fair hair cuts a striking figure. His name is Harald Hardrada.
Harald Hardrada is the prototypical Viking of the era. He is a rock star.
He's the pin-up boy of the Varangian period.
Hardrada has been fighting since the age of 15, when he witnessed the death of his brother, King Olaf, at the hands of insurgents in Norway.
Olaf is actually killed in the battle by the rebels, and Harold actually sees this. not just his half-brother, the king, it's also the man who he looks up to. This is ingrained in his memory.
That battle changes his life. Exiled from Norway, Harold escapes to Sweden and travels on to the safe haven of Kiev, the home of the Viking Rus. There, he's recruited as a mercenary by Kiev's new ruler, Prince Yaroslav I, the son of Vladimir the Great. And he quickly proves himself.
He finds his skills and his service highly valued by Yaroslav, who identifies in Harold a brave, highly capable, well-connected and ambitious man who has a chip on his shoulder. He's a man who really feels the grievances of having been excluded from power by men who he thinks are less worthy than he is.
But eventually, he cannot resist the riches on offer in the Byzantine Empire.
As a man with royal blood, you had charisma, and people would have followed him just because of that. So he would have been able to go down to Constantinople with the beginnings already of an armed following.
But Harold's not only going to Constantinople for the money. He has never forgotten that he is a Viking prince. His plan one day is to return to Norway at the head of a huge army to win back his crown. So around 1033 AD, Harold and his men embark on the year-long voyage down the Russian river systems with the aim of entering the Emperor's Guard. They arrive at just the right time. Basil II has died, and he's been replaced by his niece, Empress Zoe, and her husband, Michael IV. The new rulers are under pressure and need to establish their authority. Harold is just what they need.
He's reliable, he is effective, he gets things done, he's smart, and he's a good one to have on your side.
He's so much better than the rest. And he has practice. He participated in the most brutal battles. So he learned what was necessary to win, which was maiming, torturing, creating alliances and truces, and then breaking them. He would do whatever it took to be victorious.
Fighting in the Varangian Guard across the empire, Harold makes his mark. But Zoe and Michael's problem is that they need to do more than hold the empire together. Compared to Basil II, they're just treading water. If they are to silence the doubters, they need to achieve greatness. That means expanding the empire. So Michael sets his sights on the west, Sicily.
The objective of Sicily is to regain the western provinces for the Byzantine Empire.
For centuries, Sicily had been under Byzantine rule.
Sicily is the wheel on which the Mediterranean turns. It's a great meeting point between the Islamic and the Greek and the Latin world. It controls the approaches to the east and the west of the Mediterranean, and it's a hugely important trading area.
But now the island is in Arab hands.
Sicily is very strategically important. It must be captured. If you want to control shipping in the Western Mediterranean, Sicily is key. And for the Byzantine, trade is key. And also as well for the prestige of the empire. It's better to be conquering and capturing rather than being defeated and losing.
Harold lands there and discovers the Arabs are prepared. Knowing how effective the Varangians are on the battlefield, they've come up with a plan. They've withdrawn behind strong fortifications.
From a military point of view, this is a very hard place to conquer.
The cities are well established, well fortified, big walls, ditches in many cases, and a citadel that can hold out for a long time.
In the Middle Ages, people built walls because they worked. Castles, fortified towns, actually were rarely taken.
In terms of battle strategy, the Arabs have the upper hand.
In an age before gunpowder or the cannon, all the advantages are for the defender. So an attacker has to either sit down and hope for a long drawn-out siege, to disease maybe to spread or the city to run out of supplies.
Nobody really in their right mind wanted to storm a city wall with people up there chucking boulders and pouring boiling water and throwing spears and things at you. It was absolutely fraught with risks and almost usually doomed to failure.
This situation presents Harold with a massive problem. Classic Varangian tactics, like the boar snout, are no use against a solid wall. He has to devise something new. It's the kind of test familiar to special forces today.
The ability to improvise and use whatever the surroundings and the circumstances are available to you. The ability to, again, lateral think and think of a plan, to be creative, is absolutely essential.
Harold starts to wonder what the Arabs may have overlooked. What might their weaknesses be? And then, as he observes one fortified town, it hits him. If he can't get over the walls, he can go under them.
Harold actually develops the idea to dig a tunnel under the walls and into the city.
Out of the view of the town's walls, Harold chooses a spot close to a river, and his Varangian guard get to work.
Rather than having big heaps of soil lying around which would give the game away, they scattered it into a stream so the stream washed it away to destroy all the evidence.
At the crucial moment, when Harold believes that the tunnel is now within the city walls, he waits. There's a lull.
What the Varangians are waiting for is the perfect moment to catch their enemy unawares. In this case, it's dinner.
You have all the local Saracens eating and drinking and just doing what they do all the time because they know that these people can never penetrate their castle.
According to Harold's Norse saga, while the Arabs are enjoying their evening meal, he and his men emerge through the limestone floor of the great banqueting hall.
The Varangians go to do their deadly work. Defenders are completely shocked. These uninvited wolves have now entered their city.
They just start slaughtering these people. It was over. And the city was theirs.
It's one of a string of astonishing victories. Faced with another fortification, Harold's methods are even more cunning. This time, he borrows an idea from the ancient Greeks.
One of the tales really resembles the famous Trojan horse story. He created the impression that something is not what it seems. In other words, he created the impression that he was dying.
Harold feints illness. He places his tent further away from the main Byzantine camp so the defenders of the city can see. To and fro, soldiers go into the tent. Now, this game Harold's playing works quite well.
The Arab defenders, confused as to why no attacks had been made on their city, even send their own spies out to investigate. They learn that Harold is dead. A delegation of Varangians is then sent to the city to make an astonishing request.
The citizens are told, this is important now for us to bury our leader in style, and we'd like him to be buried in your church, and we'll pay you handsomely if you do so.
To the Arabs in the fort, the chance to have such a famous soldier buried within their walls is both an honor and irresistible.
The Varangians transport the coffin under a religious ceremony with priests and other people from the city.
According to the sagas, the gates are opened and pallbearers solemnly come in, walking slowly.
They put the coffin on the floor and jam the gates open with it.
At that crucial moment, Harold springs his trap. The Varangian guardsmen pull out their weapons from under their ceremonial clothing. They sound the call to arms.
All hell breaks loose. The Vikings absolutely destroy everyone. It turns into a massacre.
But it's at another fortified town where Harold comes up with the most ingenious plot of all. Harold's laid siege to the town, with no luck. Once again, he faces a heavily defended fort, with thick and very high stone walls. Worse, the Arab enemy are well supplied. There's no chance of starving them out. Harold once again needs to use brains rather than brawn.
He just sits for days and observes.
Any intelligence you can garner to, assist any assault is, it's essential.
He just watches the village, looking for inspiration as to how he can conquer it.
Any good surveillance or reconnaissance is always looking for weaknesses or strongly established routines.
Harold notices two things. The homes within the town's walls have roofs made of thatch. Second, that birds are nesting in the house's eaves.
He observes that sparrows every day are flying from the thatched roofs in the village into the fields and back again in the evening.
He comes up with a plan as creative as it is cruel.
He orders his men to capture as many birds as possible. When they're captured, small splinters of wood are attached to the backs of the birds and then smeared with tar. Harold then sets alight the splinters of wood and releases the birds.
Burning, the birds fly back inside the walls to their nests in the straw eaves.
It's a brilliant strategy, and it works.
Before long, the homes inside are ablaze. Just as Harold had planned, the Arab inhabitants come pouring out and give up without a fight.
The defenders obviously panic-stricken, with their entire city and the walls on fire, and they actually surrender to the Varangians.
Harold, magnanimous in victory, apparently spares the lives of the townspeople. Sicily is a great triumph for Harold and his Varangians. They prove themselves to be more than axe-wielding thugs. They have become master tacticians as well. Harold's success is the high point for the Varangian Guard and places them among the finest special forces of their age. But after 9 eventful years of service, Harold's career doesn't end well. He's imprisoned for embezzling imperial riches. Harold eventually escapes Constantinople for Kiev, and then Norway, where he becomes king in 1046. But winning back Norway is not enough. 20 years later, in 1066, Harold Hardrada is killed, trying to claim the English throne at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. Without Harold Hardrada, the Varangian Guard continues to fight, but never reaches the same heights. They do enjoy many victories in the years to come, but the advent of heavy cavalry means their tactics will become outmoded. By the 14th century, the Emperor's once crack band of invincibles become nothing more than a ceremonial troop. However, it's those glory years under Harold Hardrada and Basil II that have ensured that the Varangian Guard are remembered as one of the most devastating and successful special forces in history.
There is something, I think, that shines out of enterprise and adventure in these people leaving their homes so far away in the north.
These Varangians are pioneers. You know, they're explorers. They're men who open up horizons.
The Guard will not be remembered as just mere mercenaries, but rather a noble tradition of warriors who combine brains with brawn and pride and a desire to do whatever it takes to be victorious.
Eagle warriors, elite shock troops of the all-conquering Aztec Empire.
This is a society of warriors.
Armed with shock weapons. captives die on the sacred altar.
They would literally pluck out your still pulsating heart.
Now they face a new kind of enemy from Spain.
They had never seen iron weapons. They had never seen horses.
Two cultures that must clash.
There are no rules. It's kill or be killed.
It ends in a bloody battle that will become known as the Night of Tears.
People trampling over other people.
They're running for their lives.
For the Eagle Warriors, it is their finest hour.
This is certainly their largest military victory.
The mighty Aztec Empire is at its zenith. They came from the north. In less than 200 years, they ruthlessly conquer a wide swathe of Central America.
The Aztecs have to be absolutely ruthless, and they have to use violence in ways which intimidate local societies.
One by one, they knock out every nation that stands in their way.
The Aztecs were great warriors who were very good at battle.
An unflinching race, mobilized on a permanent war footing.
It's not numbers with the Aztecs, it's skill, ferocity, aggression.
Aztecs are literally born to fight.
From the time a male baby is born, he is personified as a warrior. He's given tiny weapons, little shield and bow and arrows. The midwife talks about it all as if he's going to grow up to be a warrior.
After the birth, a seasoned warrior takes away the baby's severed umbilical cord. He then buries it on a blood-soaked battlefield.
And this was a symbol of hope that the young boy would then aspire to and become a great warrior in his own right.
Military training starts early. From infancy, boys are enrolled at the House of the Youth.
Aztec education was tough.
Their whole point is to be better at this business than everybody else. That's it, that's all you do, military training. From the beginning to the end, it's a complete military monastic life.
Battle-hardened veterans are assigned to the novices. Their job? To turn boys into killing machines.
You take away that sense of individuality, you take away the sense of fear.
You would expect beatings or deprival of food.
You spend a lot of time drilling these people into automata, so that when they get to battle, they're not thinking, is this the right thing to do? There's the enemy, I hit him. That's my job.
The Aztec way of war is unique. They deploy their troops in a highly unusual way.
When the Aztecs went to war, they went to war to capture prisoners. The object is to hurt, maim, capture, but it's not to kill.
They didn't kill in battle. The idea was to capture a prisoner.
Being able to bring those captors back with you was a sign of great achievement.
The key is to break prisoners, but keep them alive. They are needed for a higher purpose. On the altar of the Great Pyramid towering over the Aztec capital, Tenochtitlan,
the captive would climb up the steps of the pyramid. He would be laid down across a sacrificial stone. His arms and legs held down by 4 priests so that he's stretched backwards and the chest is pulled outwards.
And a 5th priest would come down with a large flint knife and cut open your abdomen, reach inside and literally pluck out your still pulsating heart.
And the body would then be thrown down temple steps. And they would do this over and over again. It wasn't once, it was many, many times.
the ritual of human sacrifice terrifies other nations and intimidates them into submission.
The scale of human sacrifice is truly astounding. And it's much debated, but some people think that up to 50,000 people were sacrificed every year.
Carrying out over 130 sacrifices a day is killing on a truly industrial scale. But the Aztecs believe this mass slaughter is necessary. Their gods demand it.
The idea is that the gods let blood in order to create humanity, and therefore humanity must let blood to sustain the gods and to keep the sun moving through the sky.
Failure to feed the gods will have one certain outcome.
In the Aztec cosmology, if you don't continue regular and extensive human blood sacrifice, the sun won't come up, the crops won't grow, and we're all going to die.
Whether for spiritual or political reasons, the Aztecs believe human sacrifice is an existential necessity. It is so crucial that the empire develops a dedicated corps of special forces, trained to deliver captives, and lots of them. These men are called the Soldiers of the Sun. They are the Eagle Warriors. Eagle Warriors are the bravest and the best.
Warrior masculinity is central to Aztec identity. Men promote themselves, they promote their identity, they promote their importance through being warriors.
And as with today's special forces, entry into their ranks is highly selective.
A social and a military structure develops that privileges people who take a lot of captives.
This is how you earned your stripes, literally, and rose through the ranks of the military.
The more captives that they were brought to the capital, the more successful they were considered.
Today's modern armies all have their very own warrior elites. Units such as the Special Air Service, Navy SEALs, and Delta Force all train recruits not only to kill, but also to take the enemy alive. Ken Jones served with Great Britain's SAS, a body of men ruthlessly proficient in the art of taking captives.
Snatches are an essential task of special forces units. I mean, the blood sacrifices have been placed for that now by intelligence gathering because of the essential need for governments to secure high-value targets and extract information from them.
And as it was for the Eagle Warriors, today's snatchers need a high degree of skill and courage.
To be involved in a snatch, it's just a short burst of intense aggression and fluidity. In the first few seconds, you know that the target or targets are going to react because you're trying to assert control of a situation. If it drags on, then it's a bad job.
Eagle Warriors don't have the sophisticated weaponry available to today's special forces. But they are kitted out with a range of arms designed to not only kill, but also incapacitate, stun, and immobilize. These weapons all have one thing in common. They are tipped with razor-sharp volcanic glass, found in abundance throughout the Valley of Mexico. It's called obsidian.
Obsidian can be harder than steel and much stronger in compression, but it's very, very brittle. So obviously you can't make a long sword out of it. So the Aztecs used an ingenious solution. This is the macahuitl, which is the Aztec equivalent of a sword. It's basically shaped hardwood with channels cut into the side into which these sharp obsidian blades are fitted. This gives a razor-sharp cutting edge to a heavy club-like weapon. Struck on the skull, it would cut through flesh and muscle and sinew, smash the skull, destroy the brain. You'd be dead almost instantly.
But to deliver victims for sacrifice, Eagle Warriors need weapons that don't just kill.
The Aztecs are looking fundamentally for captives. They want to be able to subdue their enemies, and so you can use it as a flat subdual weapon. You can beat somebody literally into submission by using the weight on joints, shoulders, knees, vulnerable points to render a man senseless. You've then got your captive to sacrifice.
The Aztecs also use obsidian to make a wide range of dart and arrowheads. They are lightweight, hard, and incredibly sharp.
But these are worthless without a means of delivery. And in this case, the Aztecs used one of the simplest and most primitive forms of delivery, and that's this, the atlatl, or dart thrower. It's basically just a long piece of wood. In this case, it's been selected from a branch for its curve, so it fits the hand. And then a slot and notch is cut in to take the dart. It's very simple physics. All the atlatl does is extend the length of your arm, and that doubles the force I impart to the dart.
Armed with the atlatl, an Eagle Warrior can down an enemy from up to 100 meters away.
If they strike in the throat or the heart if you're unarmored, then they're going to kill.
But the atlatl is not primarily designed to kill, but to disable.
Their biggest effect is going to be to incapacitate and as a nuisance. In arms and legs, they're going to render the limbs useless. You can't run away, you can't fight back. You're injured, but you're not dead.
Eagle warriors have one more use for obsidian. They fit it to the basic spear.
The Aztecs were using obsidian blades, razor-sharp edges, and a sharp thrusting point, but fixing it to a shaft to give them extra reach to get round the defensive weapons of their opponents and strike at vulnerable points. You can make lots of rapid, accurate strikes. You can strike at the throat, down into the groin, maybe even into armpits. And all the time, well within this safe area, beyond the reach of the enemy's weapons.
The obsidian-tipped spear is also the Eagle Snatch Squad's ideal tool for controlling their prisoners.
It's very useful for marshalling and herding captives. You can direct them to where you need them to be. And if you really need to, you can reverse the weapon and strike with the butt to subdue them and quell them.
Armed with their extensive range of weaponry, the Eagle warriors have come to dominate Central America. But soon, they will face a foe the like of which they can't even imagine. It all begins with a series of strange events in the Aztec capital, Tenochtitlan. Montezuma is now in the 17th year of his reign. He presides over an empire that has never been bigger and never been stronger. But this all-powerful ruler is a deeply worried man.
The Aztecs were a culture that believed in omens, and there were 12 omens indicating that some kind of terrible catastrophe was going to happen.
Streaks of fire are seen shooting across the night sky. It is reported water in the lake surrounding the city has suddenly bubbled and boiled over. For no apparent reason, temples have suddenly caught fire and burnt to the ground.
It's hard to imagine what they would have made of this, other than being pretty terrified.
Then Montezuma receives disturbing reports from the very edge of his empire. A mysterious force of what are described as floating castles have been spotted approaching the east coast. Strange men come ashore. They have white complexions, wear bizarre outfits, and are armed with unknown powerful weapons. Hernan Cortés and his small band of conquistadors land on the mainland of America on Good Friday, 1519. They want to claim this land for their god and the King of Spain. They also plan to get very rich. But the Spanish are being tracked. Eagle warriors watch their every move and dispatch urgent reports back to the capital.
So Montezuma is really anxious to find out who they are, to find out what they've got, what they want, and how he's going to deal with them.
The emperor assembles his full war council to work out a plan of action.
Montezuma would have been surrounded by his closest and most senior advisors.
Many of the senior councils were comprised of senior military figures, so eagle warriors would almost certainly have been part of those councils.
The War Council tries to make some sense of the astonishing drawings that have been made of the intruders. The eagle warrior's attention is drawn to sketches of a strange and powerful unknown weapon.
This kind of random killing thing, you can kill somebody a long way away and it makes a lot of noise and smoke. So there's sound, there's smoke, there's shock.
And it isn't just unknown weapons the Aztecs are faced with.
So we've got two animals they're not familiar with.
They would have been completely flabbergasted by these giant creatures, these horses.
These Spanish fighting dogs, these are terrible things.
They had never seen horses. They had never seen dogs trained to kill.
So there's a lot of shock. There's a lot of, technology, anxiety comes in here. What is all of this?
But Montezuma's younger brother, Cuitlahuac, isn't a man easily rattled. This senior military commander demands a swift, sharp campaign to annihilate the interlopers. He argues they may have strange new weapons, but they're small in number and no match for the eagle warriors. But the Aztec world is dominated by religion. As the ultimate theological leader, Montezuma is determined to find a spiritual explanation for the arrival of this strange force. And it's the Spanish helmet his spies have acquired that catches his attention. Some reports suggest he sees a resemblance to the headdress of the god Quetzalcoatl.
I think when Montezuma is processing this information, he's going to take a religious slant on this. As far as he's concerned, this is a portent from heaven.
Other accounts claim Montezuma sees connections with Quetzalcoatl, a white-faced god who vanished across the sea to the east. Prophecies state if Quetzalcoatl returns in Aztec Year 1 read, he will strike at kings. It is now Year 1 read, and it seems a white-faced leader has indeed appeared from the east.
Is it the return of one of the gods? Is Cortez one of the ancient Mexican gods? What is going on here? Why are these strange people landing on my coast? Where is this going to end?
Montezuma overrules Cuitlahuac and the warriors. He decides violence is the wrong strategy to keep this unknown force out of his capital. Ambassadors have suggested that there is one thing that these strangers value above all: gold. And so Montezuma makes the decision to buy them off.
Cortés was presented with beautiful gold presents.
It's the last thing Montezuma should have done.
They thought, well, this is interesting. We're onto a good thing here. We want more of this.
The Spanish just keep coming, heading straight for the Aztec capital.
The more Montezuma promises them, the more they understand must be there. If he can give us all of this, what else has he got?
That's how he ends up with Cortez on his doorstep.
After a 7-month, arduous march, Cortés and his band of conquistadors get their first sight of the Aztec capital, Tenochtitlan. They have never seen anything like it.
It's only when they get to Tenochtitlan they can see the sheer scale of what the Aztecs have.
The conquistadors were absolutely impressed with the beauty of the city of Tenochtitlan. A city surrounded by buildings built on a lake with overlooking volcanoes, covered with snow.
The awestruck Spaniards make their way across the causeway separating the capital from the mainland.
It is almost certainly the largest city any of them have ever seen, perhaps 250,000 people.
A city bigger and better than those of Seville and Granada.
Finally, Cortés gets to meet the man whose powerful and wealthy empire he plans to seize. Spanish accounts state there was now an exchange of gifts with Montezuma. Historians disagree over whether Montezuma receives Cortés as a god or as a respected ambassador of a mighty foreign empire. However, there is no doubting that the emperor now rolls out the red carpet for the conquistadors.
Moctezuma was giving the best he could offer to Cortés and to his soldiers. He offered the palace of Axayacatl. The Spaniards were very welcomed by the Mexican king.
But whether by accident or design, Montezuma has placed the Spaniards in a location where they can be kept an eye on. They will be lodged close to the headquarters of the Eagle Warriors.
Where Cortés was staying, which was in a former ruler's palace, is very near to the Eagle precinct. In all likelihood, he would have been aware of the Eagle Warriors simply because they were some of the most prominent figures in society.
The Eagle Warriors are now eye to eye with the Spanish and leave them in no doubt as to what their job is in the Aztec Empire.
The Spaniards would have picked them out for soldiers, from their dress, from the way they carried themselves. This is their army. And it's two rough street gangs eyeing each other up.
But the Eagle Warriors are mystified by the behavior of the Spanish soldiers in their midst. They appear more interested in grabbing gold than posing any real military threat. Furthermore, the Eagles have the conquistadors outnumbered and contained in their palace compound. What the Aztecs don't understand yet is just what sort of man they have let into their city.
There's no doubt that Cortés was a very clever, strategic thinking soldier. He realized that they were in a very difficult situation, but he also realized that there were enormous riches and rewards to be had by staying put.
There is now a period of uneasy peace between the Eagle Warriors and the Spaniards. But it was never likely to last, and is shattered when Cortés receives an urgent dispatch from the coast. 7 of the conquistadors' comrades in arms have been attacked and killed, and they have died the Aztec way. The Spaniards were taken captive, bound, and forced up to the altar. Once there, their hearts were ripped out. The conquistadors are appalled at the news. It's a timely reminder of their likely fate if the Eagle warriors go on the offensive. But for now, the Spanish are hell-bent on revenge.
You can kill, but you don't sacrifice. Killing, but not murder. What the Aztecs are doing is murder. It's the deliberate killing of helpless prisoners.
But the canny Cortés channels his men's anger in a clever way. He leads an armed deputation to the royal palace. He wants to seize himself a hostage, and not just any hostage.
One of the masterstrokes that he had was to carry out the kidnapping of Moctezuma. Cortés was very clever because he was saying, it's not me that wants to keep you here. I would let you go back today if I could, but it's all my captains that they're crying for your blood. I'm really looking after your best interests.
It's unclear why Montezuma finally does give in to the threats of Cortés. But comply he does, and the mighty emperor allows himself to be marched off and placed under effective house arrest.
In order to use Montezuma effectively as a puppet ruler, though, there has to be a degree of consent. And whether that's obtained through fear or through a need for cooperation is hard to tell.
Whichever the case, the kidnapping of Montezuma opens up an unprecedented crisis for the intensely hierarchical Aztec Empire. Any likely response can only come from senior military commanders and leading Eagle warriors.
It's possible, of course, that there was actually quite a lot of dissent amongst people like the warrior leaders. You can't imagine these great, brave, military figures standing round and allowing the Spanish to obviously dominate.
No doubt there was debate behind the scenes as to how to deal with this.
The obvious rallying point for the dissenting warriors is Montezuma's brother, Cuitlahuac, the man who has opposed the Spanish from day one. But in the Aztec Empire, there is no precedent for going against the wishes of an emperor.
He was a commander of the army, he was the highest ranking individual in the state, he was a demigod, and so if he said he was happy to go along with it, which apparently he did, there wasn't very much anyone else could do.
To add insult to injury, Cortés now demands the keys to the Totocalli, the empire's vast treasure house. This is what the Spanish have crossed the seas and risked their necks for. Jewelry, precious stones, and gold. Huge amounts of gold. With Montezuma's consent, Cortés now controls the city and effectively nullifies the Eagle warriors. But then his delicate diplomatic balancing act, suddenly all comes crashing down. Cortés returns from a mission to the coast to find Tenochtitlan in open revolt.
He comes back to the city and is very unhappy to find his troops besieged and starving in the palace where they'd been staying.
Cortés had left the city in a state of uneasy peace, but now returns to bloody mayhem.
Alvarado, who he'd left in charge, is a rather blunt instrument, to put it mildly, and he obviously has instigated an outright battle where Cortés hadn't wanted one.
Alvarado has led a massacre of up to 1,000 high-ranking Aztecs, including senior Eagle warriors, at a religious festival in the main temple.
In the middle of this festival, he decided to attack and massacre the participants, which caused huge consternation and disquiet in the city, as you can imagine.
It's the final straw for the military commanders and embittered Eagle warriors. Finally, they decide this is the time to fight back.
High-ranking individuals have decided that Moctezuma is a lost cause.
His authority is being undercut, his role as a representative of the gods is being undercut.
Well, they decided that they would just give up on him.
They replace him even though he's still alive, and that's almost unheard of.
For the Eagle warriors, there is only one contender for the top job, the hero of countless wars, Cuitlahua. Cuitlahua instantly presses his Eagle warriors into service. And they have the Spanish just where they want them, holed up and surrounded in their palace, located in the center of the city.
The Spanish are trapped in the palace. They're running out of all the things they need.
I don't think we can have any doubt that the Spanish are absolutely in fear of their lives. Part of that was the realization that they were up against a very slick fighting machine.
Hopelessly outnumbered, Cortés begs Montezuma to appeal to his subjects, to let the Spanish leave the city. But the hapless emperor is jeered and pelted with rocks. Montezuma is mortally wounded. Cortés now has a grim choice to make. He must either fight against the overwhelming odds or surrender with the inevitable consequences.
They slept with their armor on, they slept with their horses saddled and bridled, ready to escape. They knew that they were in a very perilous situation.
Cuitlahua now summons his top warriors to a secret briefing. He reveals his strategy for annihilating the invaders. They will starve the conquistadors out into the open, where they will have to stand and fight. If they choose to make a run for it, the warriors will be ready.
Part of their strategy is to make the exit from the city as complicated and as difficult as they can.
The city is surrounded by a wide lake. The only way out is across one of the 5 causeways connecting Tenochtitlan with the mainland. The Spanish are besieged in their palace, just off the central temple precinct. The most direct way out of the city is to head west for the Tacuba Causeway and use it to retreat to the mainland. But Cuitlahua has a surefire way of cutting off the escape route and ensnaring them in the city.
They remove a lot of the bridges that allowed people to cross over the causeways and the canals.
They would have worked out that this was going to be a very dangerous place to get trapped in.
And if the Spanish do manage to make it as far as the breached causeway, the Eagle warriors will be ready to go in for the kill.
That's when they see it's their moment to pick off the retreating troops.
It's a lot easier to kill people if you're knocking them into the water.
It's an obvious place for an ambush.
The situation is becoming increasingly desperate in the Spanish compound. Cortés mounts the walls to scout a potential escape route out of the city. But what he sees shocks him.
Cortez can see already the bridges have been destroyed or rendered useless.
Even worse, by now the conquistadors are almost out of water, food, and gunpowder. Their options are stark. Break out and face a quick end at the hands of the Eagle warriors, or stay put and slowly starve to death.
They decide that they're just going to have to break out.
Cortez may be trapped, but this Spaniard is not going down without a fight. He orders his men to rip down the wooden beams from the roof of the palace. They lash the spars together. They hope this makeshift bridge will span the gaps in the causeway. The conquistadors are almost ready to break out, but first, they have one final all-important job.
It tells us a lot about them, that before they break out, they divide up the gold and every man has his share.
And a lot of the soldiers loaded themselves up with this gold. I mean, why wouldn't they? It was too good an opportunity to miss.
Midnight. The Spanish pull out. Unimpeded, they make their way stealthily through the city and head due west towards the Tacuba Causeway.
They start to escape at night. This is a city with very regular, very straight streets. It wouldn't be terribly difficult to find your way to the causeway from the central precinct.
It all seems to be going well for the Spanish. They reach the lakeside, and then...
The Mexicans were ready to kill as many Spaniards as they could.
The Eagle warriors soon put the portable bridge out of action. Now they have the Spanish trapped all along the causeway.
They're, of course, at an incredible tactical disadvantage, being attacked from all sides while they're trying to escape across these narrow causeways.
The Eagle warriors are seasoned, they are skillful, they have terrible weapons that inflict terrible damage.
However good your armour is, it will only take you so far against incredible weight of numbers.
Despite their sophisticated weaponry, the Spanish are now cut off by the Eagle warriors.
The Spanish had to wade through and jump over these gaps, these canals, where the bridges had been taken away.
And then it descends into chaos.
People trampling over other people to try and cross the gaps in the causeways.
The Spanish now pay a high price for their lust for gold.
They're running for their lives and they're carrying a large weight of gold with them. So either they're unbelievably brave or unbelievably stupid.
And a lot of them actually came to grief because the weight of the gold in their clothes just dragged them to the bottom of the water and they drowned.
Cortez and a few of his men escape, but many stragglers are rounded up, bound and bundled away by the Eagle warriors. They know exactly what to do with their captives.
Spaniards didn't surrender. They were stunned and captured and dragged away.
The proud Eagle warriors have suffered months of humiliation at the hands of the Spanish invaders. Now it is time for their revenge. The Spanish who have made it to the safety of the mainland can do nothing but look back at the city in horror.
The sight of the sacrifices on the pyramids, the sound of their own companions being butchered up there.
The Eagle warriors have wiped out most of the army of Cortés and retrieved the bulk of the looted treasure. Legend has it that as he looks back over the killing ground, Cortés weeps. The Spanish call it La Noche Triste, the Night of Tears. But for the Eagle warriors, this is their finest hour. Within a year, Cortés raises a new army and once again marches on Tenochtitlan. After months of fierce street fighting, the Spanish finally take the shattered city. The Eagle warriors are not defeated by cold Spanish steel, but by virulent European diseases. Thousands of Eagle warriors and millions of Aztecs succumb to smallpox and are wiped out. History often dismisses the Aztec warriors as hopelessly ineffectual when faced by the conquistadors. However, it is clear that on La Noche Triste, the Eagle warriors routed the Spanish, then the most powerful nation in Europe.
During the period of the Spanish conquest, this is certainly their largest military victory.
I don't think there's any doubt that the expulsion of the Spanish from the city following the events of the Noche Triste was a major victory for the Aztecs.
The Noche Triste was I think, a tactical victory for the Aztecs. They defeated the Spaniards, but the Spaniards got away. If they'd killed them all, it might have been different.
Today, the Mexican capital stands on the ruins of one of the most fabulous cities ever constructed, and on the bones of one of the most powerful fighting forces ever raised, the Aztec Eagle warriors.